There's a particular kind of confusion that happens in intimate relationships that almost nobody talks about clearly. When you're with someone you genuinely want to be close to in a moment that should feel good, and something in you is just not there. Not performing absence, but you're actually absent. And you come back to yourself a few minutes later and realize you've been somewhere else entirely without deciding to go. On the reverse, you're with the same person in what should be a comfortable moment, and you find yourself scanning them for information, reading their face, calibrating their mood, trying to determine from the quality of their silence whether you're still okay, whether something has shifted, whether you need to do something to close a gap that you're not even sure is there. Both of these are the nervous system doing its job. The problem is that the job it's doing is an old one, written for a context that no longer exists, running on hardware that hasn't been updated in years. Understanding that doesn't immediately fix anything, but it changes the frame from what's wrong with me to what is my system trying to protect. And that's a much more useful question to be asking. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Cyndi Darnell, a sex and relationship therapist working with all kinds of people in all kinds of relationship configurations all over the world. This channel is where we have the conversations that many of us have in our heads, but not out loud. Here, we talk about relationships, desire, intimacy, connection, friendships, emotions, grief, and what gets in the way. And if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. So let's get started. First of all, your nervous system is not interested in your intentions. And this is something that takes a lot of us a while to absorb, that the autonomic nervous system, our body's main control center, doesn't care what you want to be feeling. Its job is to manage our body's functioning below the level of awareness. So it controls things like digestion, heartbeat, temperature, breathing, and even sexual arousal. It's there to keep us healthy and regulated, but sometimes it goes off in its own direction. The trouble is that it's not responsive to your intentions, your values, your relationship goals, or the fact that you've read 3 books about communication and you're really trying. It responds to cues, specifically cues of safety and threat, and it's reading them constantly in every environment, including and especially relational ones. This is why it can seem to be working against you rather than with you, especially in relationships and intimate moments. Because the surveillance process is largely unconscious. The signals it's tracking in intimate partnerships are extraordinarily fine-tuned, not what someone says, but the rhythm and the tone of how they say it, micro-expressions, the quality of eye contact, whether a body is oriented towards you or subtly away, whether a silence feels companionable or loaded. Your conscious mind is not involved in this process. By the time you've registered that something feels off, your nervous system has already shifted its state in response to it. It's already begun moving you towards protection, or towards engagement, or somewhere in between. The feeling arrives after the fact because your body moves first. And this is not a design flaw. It's an extraordinarily sophisticated survival system. The difficulty is that in intimate relationships, survival-oriented processing and connection-oriented processing are often working at cross purposes, and the survival system has a faster response time. So let's look at 3 states and what they feel like from the inside, because the autonomic nervous system doesn't operate as a simple on-off switch. It moves across a range of states, and different points along that range produce genuinely different qualities of experience. When the system reads safety, something opens, your face becomes more mobile and expressive, your voice carries more warmth and range, and you can read other people's emotional cues and respond to them with flexibility. In this state, you have access to the full complexity of human connection. Intimacy is available here. Desire is available here. The kind of presence that makes sex feel like something more than just physical mechanics. That lives in this territory. But when the nervous system reads threat, it mobilizes. That familiar register of anxiety arrives. Urgency, hypervigilance, the sense that something needs to be done right now. In relationships, this tends to show up as reactivity. The argument that escalated faster than any person meant it to. The sudden or desperate need for reassurance. The reaching that happens when distance is felt and can't be tolerated. When the threat feels inescapable, when mobilizing doesn't resolve it, the system can then move into shutdown, flatness, numbness, the sense of being present in the body, but not quite in the self. The withdrawal that doesn't feel like a choice because it isn't one. In intimate contexts, this is often what people are describing when they say that they went somewhere else during sex, or felt nothing when they expected to feel something, or found themselves watching the interaction as if from a slightly remote space. None of these states are chosen, and none of them are permanent. The nervous system is designed to move, to respond to shifting conditions, including the shifting conditions of a relationship that's slowly becoming safer, more understood, more genuinely mutual. And this is where attachment lives in the body. Attachment theory and nervous system theory describe the same territory from different angles, and where they meet is in the body. Attachment theory, broadly speaking, holds that we develop internal working models of relationships, implicit predictions about what closeness will bring, whether our needs are likely to be met, and whether depending on someone is safe or dangerous. These models are built from experience. They're also encoded somatically, not just as thoughts, but as patterns of tension, of breath, of posture, and physiological reactivity. This means that when closeness activates an old protective pattern, it's not always experienced as a memory or a thought. It's experienced as a physical event, a tightening of the chest, a sudden desire to create distance, a flatness that descends without announcement, the urge to make a joke at exactly the moment when something real is being offered. It can even show up as a drop in arousal, even if you're actually really enjoying yourself. A lot of the time, this is when people will describe a loss of erection or a loss of wetness or a tightness where they don't want it. So think of it this way. If you grew up in an environment where closeness reliably led to disappointment, or where reaching for someone meant risking not being caught, your nervous system built a model around that, not as a conclusion that you arrived at, but as a physical prediction. Closeness produces this outcome, so the system will begin protecting against that outcome before closeness fully arrives. The protection isn't aimed at the present. It's aimed at the past, that the body is still, on some level, living inside. So this same logic runs in the opposite direction too. If closeness were available but uncertain, sometimes present, sometimes withdrawn, unpredictably, the system learns a different response. Stay alert, move quick towards the connection when it's available, monitor constantly for signs that it's about to disappear. Not because that's what you want to be doing, but because that's what the system learnt to do to manage that uncertainty. So what does this actually feel like in intimate moments? You might recognize yourself somewhere in some of this. Perhaps you're in bed with a partner and the mood is tender, things feel close in a way that's genuinely good, and then, from somewhere that you can't locate, you feel the pull towards distance. Not away from them, exactly, just towards yourself, towards the familiar interior. You might make a joke. You might suddenly need a glass of water. You might feel a vague restlessness that has no object. Nothing bad is happening, but something in you is uncomfortable with how much you need this to continue and how little control you have over whether it does. The withdrawal is not indifference, but it is the system doing what it learned to do when too much was at stake. Or the experience is entirely different. Your partner is with you, present, but their attention drifts for a moment towards a sound outside or a passing thought. Nothing significant. And you feel it immediately. Something registers the shift and begins moving toward a question. What does this mean? Have I done something? Is something changing? And that question arrives before you've had any opportunity to evaluate. And now you're partially somewhere else, monitoring the temperature of the room, so to speak, rather than inhabiting it. Not because you distrust your partner, but because your nervous system learned that that window could close, and it's developed a surveillance habit around exactly that possibility. Perhaps you've been carrying something all week, a sustained low-grade tension, the kind that doesn't resolve because there's nothing specific to resolve it against. What you want is to be held, to feel someone close and solid, not to have to hold your own edges for a while. And then, when your partner reaches for you, something shuts. Not because the want isn't there, but because the want feels so large, it feels frightening to move towards it, as if acknowledging it fully would make its absence unbearable if anything goes wrong. None of these are failures of feeling. They're the body being entirely consistent with what it learned. So let's look at the conversation between two nervous systems. Something that tends to get missed in conversations about intimacy is that you're never just managing your own state. You're in constant, largely nonverbal dialogue with the other person's nervous system, because nervous systems influence each other, not through deliberate action or conscious communication, but through the biological signaling that a human connection is built on. The steadiness of someone's presence, the tone of their voice, the quality of their attention. These land in your nervous system as information, and your system adjusts its state in response. And this runs in both directions simultaneously. So what this means in practice is that what you bring into an intimate encounter affects the other person's capacity to be present and vice versa. A partner who is monitoring or braced or carrying a visible disappointment about how things are going is broadcasting a set of cues that the other person's nervous system is reading and responding to, often before the other person has said a word. A tense body in the bed next to you is information. A silence that is trying too hard to be fine is information. The system registers these things and begins, quietly, to protect itself. And this is where the combination of attachment patterns becomes particularly significant, because what looks like a relational problem is often two nervous systems doing exactly what they learned to do in response to each other in a loop that neither person chose and both people are sustaining. Now let's look at when the patterns meet each other. Attachment research has identified broad patterns in how people tend to organize around closeness, not as fixed categories, but because humans are considerably more complicated than that, as tendencies that become particularly visible under conditions of relational stress or vulnerability. So when someone whose nervous system tends toward anxious monitoring, they're hypervigilant to signs of disconnection, urgently oriented toward closing distance, or is in an intimate relationship with someone whose system tends toward avoidant protection, self-contained, activated by too much need, directed towards them, the dynamic that often develops is a painful internal logic. The anxious system reads distance and moves toward it. The avoidant system reads approach and moves away. The moving away confirms the fear that drove the approach. The approach confirms the overwhelm that drove the withdrawal, and both people are responding accurately to what they are experiencing. Both people are making the thing they fear far more likely. In sexual terms, this can manifest in ways that feel deeply personal, but are structurally consistent. One person needs emotional closeness before their body will open to physical intimacy and needs to feel genuinely met first. The other person experiences that level of emotional intensity as its own kind of pressure and finds their system contracting around exactly the closeness that was meant to create the conditions for sex. One person reaches for physical intimacy as a route to feeling connected. The other finds that physical intimacy requires feeling connected first. The timing never quite aligns, and the misalignment slowly accumulates meanings it was never intended to carry. The less visible version, worth naming here because it's often missed, is what happens when two people with similar patterns are together. Two anxious systems can produce a particular kind of relational intensity that also is its own problem. The hypervigilance amplified, both people monitoring, neither able to settle because the other's alertness confirms the alertness is warranted. Two avoidance systems can produce a relationship that functions well on the surface and is genuinely quite lonely. Two people coexisting with great competence and very little felt contact. These are not failure states, though. They are the patterns doing what patterns do when they haven't had enough experience to be updated. Okay, if this is landing for you and you want to go a little further, there's a few ways that we can work together. My book, Sex When You Don't Feel Like It, is a good place to start for folks who enjoy reading. But if you're looking for something more personal, I offer coaching and counseling for individuals, couples, and polycules all over the world. And if you want a structured path that you can move through in your own time, my online courses are built for exactly that. Links to all of it are in the description below. And if you're finding this video useful, please share it with someone who might need it, and like and subscribe if you haven't already. This genuinely helps this work reach more people through the YouTube algorithm. Okay, so now let's talk about what actually changes things. The nervous system updates through experience, not insight, not intention, not understanding the theory clearly enough, through accumulated evidence that the predicted outcome does not arrive, through closeness that doesn't lead to the thing the system has been bracing for, through enough moments of being genuinely met that the prediction begins slowly to revise itself. This is not a comfortable process, and it's not a linear one, and it's not a fast one. The system doesn't update at once. It tests, it reverses, it generalizes too quickly or not enough. A relationship that has been genuinely safe for 3 years can still activate an old pattern under sufficient stress, not because the safety wasn't real, but because the system learned what it learned in the conditions of considerable intensity. And those learning conditions left deep grooves. What tends to create the conditions for updating is not the absence of activation. That's neither achievable nor is it the point. It's the presence of repair. What the nervous system is tracking across time is not whether ruptures happen, but what happens after them. Whether disconnection leads to sustained disconnection or to return. Whether vulnerability is used or held. Whether reaching is met or missed. And if missed, whether the missing is addressed or left to quietly accumulate. Slowing down is not a metaphor here. The physical pace of an intimate encounter, the quality of attention, the breath, the movement, is direct input into the nervous system. States shift somatically. You cannot think your way into a state of genuine safety, but you can sometimes breathe your way there, or be touched into it, or find it through sustained stillness with someone whose system has settled enough to bring yours with it. Understanding your own pattern with genuine curiosity rather than self-criticism creates a small but meaningful gap between activation and response. You don't always have to act from the place your system has arrived at. Noticing that you've moved into an old pattern is not the same as being free of it, but it is the beginning of having a different relationship to it. So the nervous system is not the obstacle to intimacy. In the most fundamental sense, it's the instrument through which intimacy is experienced, the system that reads safety, opens toward contact, registers attunement and misattunement with a sensitivity that no conscious process could replicate. When that system is operating from an old map, drawn in a context that no longer applies by a version of you that had fewer options, intimacy becomes complicated in ways that resist explanation from inside them. You're not choosing this, and you're not broken, but you are carrying a history in your body, and that history has strong opinions about closeness, and it expresses them at the most vulnerable moments, because those are exactly the moments when the system decides it needs to be heard. The work is not to silence it and not to push through. It's to understand what it's protecting well enough to evaluate in the present moment whether the protection is still necessary. And that evaluation takes time. It takes relationship. For many people, it takes the kind of sustained, skilled support that goes beyond what a video like this can offer. And I want to name that directly rather than imply that understanding the framework is the same as doing the work. It is not. But understanding the framework is often where the work begins. And the fact that you're asking these questions about your own patterns, about your responses, about what your system has learned and why, that's not nothing. That's actually where it starts. This stuff isn't simple, and I don't think it should be. But I do think it is worth staying with. My book, Sex When You Don't Feel Like It, is linked below, along with all of my online courses and other information about how to work with me. If you're ready for more personalized coaching, counseling, and support, this is all available. Details are in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I love making these videos for you. Please remember to share this, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.